Welcome, everybody. My name is Mina Jane. I'm the director of the Ashland Public Library in Massachusetts, and I'm very excited to be here for, I don't know, like our sixth session with Loretta Chase and Susan Holloway Scott, the two nerdy history girls. And you might know that they had a blog a few years ago. I think it's been defunct for a little while, but it's still live. It's still out there in the interweb, and you can still catch it. But it was just full of historical facts and minutia, which was just fascinating to all of us history buffs. So we'll talk about Loretta and Susan's thoughts on all kinds of historical things in a minute. I just want to say a couple things. One is I'd like to thank the Friends of the Ashland Public Library for supporting all of our programs. And I would like to thank Loretta and Susan for always letting us share this program with other libraries, because when libraries, get together, we just make magic. So we are going to be doing, asking questions. So if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A, which is a button at the bottom of your screen. If you want to chat with each other, feel free. I kind of pay attention to it, but I can't say I pull questions from there. So please put your questions in the Q&A. So Loretta Chase, we're very well known as an iconic romance writer who wrote Lord of Scoundrels, probably the best book ever written. If you haven't read it, do it. Susan Holloway Scott writes more historical fiction and also writes just these magnificent books about things we want to know about. Like we're going to talk about her upcoming book, but she just writes about it. And I think like one of her books was it Eliza Hamilton?
Yeah, that was several years ago now, but yes, sort of Eliza's side of the Hamilton story.
So I wasn't going to start with this, although I said I was going to. But your pendant is actually.
Oh, you are going to start with it. Well, we'll come back to it.
Okay, we'll come back to it.
Okay, Hamilton fans, do not go away.
So stay with us. And like I said, use the chat to let us know where you're coming from or anything that you want to say to each other. So I think today we were going to start talking about men's clothing from the eras that you all write about. So I think, was it waistcoats we were going to talk about?
Yes, Susan and I were having a conversation today about under waistcoats, which was something I just discovered a few years ago. I didn't know there was any such thing. Today I did a little more because the subject came up, and when Susan and I talk about something, of course I have to go digging in and finding out more about it. And apparently, from about 1800 on, it was something that was happening, and it was a very thin sort of waistcoat-looking thing that went on under your waistcoat so that you would have a contrasting color next to the collar of the waistcoat. And red was a popular one. Red was a popular color. But apparently some people wore several of these. So they would have these little lines of fabric to show, and it was a way of showing off your wealth.
It looks like it's kind of the same effect you see sometimes with women will put like a scarf inside the lapels of a jacket. It kind of gives you this like little stripe of color that goes along underneath the lapels. And we were fascinated by this. We wanted to know more.
Like, what are they made of, right?
So we're still not quite sure. But the tailors and the experts down in Colonial Williamsburg had told us that there were it was another layer of waistcoat. And there is one in the collection of Colonial Williamsburg that looks like it's a very lightweight. I guess we should go backwards and explain what a waistcoat is. It's what we would think of as a vest now. And the word goes waistcoat to waistcoat to vest.
Waistcoat, yeah.
So what was that interior thing you were talking about? Is that the waistcoat?
They're wearing layers of waistcoats, I guess.
Oh.
So you have this beautiful, usually very beautifully done, what we would call a vest. Like a man's three-piece suit? Mm-hmm. Well, this is what was going on early. And it was used very often. It was some beautiful embroidered material, colorful, whatever. Sometimes they could be plain, but they would have maybe beautiful embroidery and an incredibly gorgeous fabric. And underneath that, like on top of the shirt, there would be Susan compared it to a Dicky. Okay. So not necessarily as fitted as the waistcoat that you're wearing, the waistcoat, but it's underneath just enough to give you a line of color here.
Mhm. So
Contrast.
I've always thought a Dicky was the trunk of a car in England. What?
Yes.
Okay, so what is it? Is a Dicky like a scarf?
How can it, this is that like in the 50s and 60s and maybe earlier than that, it was like if you wanted to have the look of a collar, but not the whole bulk of wearing a shirt underneath, or a turtleneck without all the bulk of a sweater. It was like just the collar and then like a front that would go
Yeah.
underneath something.
Like a bib, someone said. Someone just said.
A what?
Like a bib. Sort of
Yes.
like a bib.
Yes.
Oh, I'm doing a Google search and I'm just seeing like, regular shirts. So I'm gonna have to do a little bit more like a partial shirt or bib. Okay. Oh, I see. Yes. Okay. Yes. It just kind of goes right here.
Yeah. And for women, they're called like a shimy zette, right, Loretta?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's
Yeah.
like a little shirt that would tuck in. We're off to the races, aren't we?
But what was the purpose? Just to like fill out
Style.
your
Yeah, it's like
Decoration.
you would get more color, another just extra, without the bulk of having multiple layers of the
Yes.
same heavy weight.
Yeah.
Even a lot of the waistcoats are the fancy ones or waistcoats are a plainer fabric in the back, not only to save money but to keep it lighter. The part that showed in the front was where the fancy fabric went.
Well, Vanessa says, and I had the same question, is under the vest, if they go under the vest, wasn't it really hot with so many layers, even if they were just small?
They were using very lightweight fabrics for this. And you're going to see, I'm guessing that you would see more layers in colder weather than in the warmer weather.
You had started saying something, Loretta, though. I interrupted you.
I forgot.
Okay. So, I mean, we're like sort of the waistcoat because that goes under the jacket. So there's
Right.
sort of like a shirt, then
Yes.
like Dicky type thing, and then a waistcoat, and then a jacket.
Yes.
And the cravat as well.
Mm-hmm.
So wouldn't the cravat sort of hide any little bits of color?
No. I've got some great prints, but I can't show them to you right now. So, but no, it doesn't. It's just there was one print that caught my eye, and that was what started this whole thing several years ago. And it's the man is wearing he's in evening dress. He's wearing a black coat, and under the coat he has this silvery embroidered waistcoat, and there's this line of red that I could see on the edge of the waistcoat, and I'm like, well, what's that? So that's it. I looked at the description, and I found, and it said under waistcoat, and I was, whoa, never heard of that. So then that's when I started learning about them. But you can see them, and that's the whole point. Even at this time, like say in the 1820s, 1830s, when you're seeing this more, men's clothing isn't as colorful as it is in the time that Susan's writing. So it's a little quieter, but they got that beautiful, that peacock look with their the waistcoat.
So, and did you just mentioned Susan's book. So did this research end up in either of your books as you were trying to create your male characters?
But I think that clothing is really important as a way to make bring your character to life, because everybody, especially in the past, I think now clothing is more democratic. People all kind of dress the same slobby way. But in the past, clothing really showed your wealth, your rank, who you were. Even certain trades had specific clothing that they wore. So it was an important thing. So I know Loretta and I both feel the same way. We try and get all the details of the clothing right, because it's one more way to help build your character, rather than just saying, she wore a beautiful ball gown. If you can go into some of the details, it helps bring that world to life for readers, we hope. Hope anyway. Or their waistcoats.
And if you're undressing them, it's nice to know that stuff, right? You want to know what's coming off for the sex scenes.
Yeah.
Well, and how people are restricted by clothing, with women, how it would affect them or not affect them. Because Loretta and I are always talking about there's so many myths about how women couldn't do anything in corsets or stays, which is the earlier version of corsets. And in reality, they had a lot of, they were dressed in that kind of underwear from childhood, and they were very comfortable in it. They would probably feel uncomfortable without it. And as far as the support garment thing, so it's things like that. You try and build it into your stories, so people, you see how what's similar to people now and what's different.
And doesn't it affect where you were in society about the kind of clothing that you would wear? So like somebody who was wearing like 4 layers, did they have to have servants in order to help them put this on and off?
That would be helpful, yes. But they were going to have servants. If they're wealthy, they're going to have servants.
It's also nobody lived alone. Everybody, even if you didn't have servants, you were living with other people who were, extended family, friends, or whatever. Almost no one lived on their own. There was always somebody else that could help you. But I think people just got skilled at everyday people skilled at dressing themselves.
Mary Lynn asks, what fabrics did they use closer to the skin because they had to be comfortable, right? Or were they more interested in comfort versus ease and care of clothing? I mean, if we're talking about
linen, linen is the all-purpose fabric, and linen becomes, not only is it's considered a healthy fabric, and so next to your skin, it will absorb perspiration and help keep you clean and cool. And it would also protect your more expensive clothing that you put over it. You wouldn't sweat it out.
Yeah.
And every rank, everybody wore linen. It's pretty universal. It's just the degree of how good a quality it is.
So if you're poorer, it's a coarser linen. And if you're richer, it's a very fine linen that feels silky.
Yeah. So, but who took care of these clothes? Like cleaning, as the last part of Marilyn's question was, I thought it was really interesting. It's like, how did they clean this? Like, so like I'm Indian, I don't know if you know this, but like in India, like in the olden days, they would take their clothes out to the river and they'd beat them with soap and, the water to clean them. And that seems pretty harsh on, especially like very expensive, fine clothing.
Loretta, are you going?
Yes, I can do this one
Okay,
because
well,
I just did some research.
I just feel like I'm talking too much.
Yeah. Okay. I'll do my part. You do your part.
Okay.
One of the things I just learned, I learned in the course of working on one of my books was that that people would send, the rich guys would send their linen out of London, and out of London in those days referred to Kensington, because they had nice clean water there. And that's where the clothing was washed. And you could do, they're not treating the undergarments as though they're fragile. They're taking a beating because they have to get them really clean. The stuff that's going to be they're going to be really careful with are going to be the silks and the satins and those fine fabrics, and that would be like spot cleaning. It's the underneath clothing was what got dirty, got your bodily oils on it and sweat, etc. So that was the part that they were cleaning. Susan, on to you.
On to me, talking about this. Yeah, I mean, the linen, again, linen was considered. I know one of the things we're always talking about is bathing and how clean they were. People considered having clean linen as part of hygiene, that you would change. And for women, it's a shift or a chemise that you're wearing that goes underneath just a long kind of shapeless, fine linen garment. And then your other clothing goes on top of it, the other layers. And for men, it's their shirt, which is it's much longer than modern shirts that would often until later sort of substitute for underdrawers. Everything would just be tucked down under there. So your shirt becomes your all-purpose. It's like a 18th century onesie that your all-purpose undergarment at that point. So it was to clean it. Yeah.
Someone just made the point about that relates to the cleaning, about how they were sewn to be very sturdy. Susan and I have seen the stitching on some of these, and it's all hand stitching. It is unbelievable how tiny the stitches are to hold the shirts.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And the buttons, sometimes the men's shirts have cufflinks that would be removable, or buttons that are made like on bone rings. It's woven thread on it so that they can withstand. They're also fabric, so they can withstand the heavy duty washing.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to ask about chamber pots eventually, so I'm just going to throw it out there right now. Is that like, guys, could just go sort of anywhere and their clothing might not be affected, but women, had a lot more to go through. How did they keep their undergarments as clean as possible throughout the day?
Well, they weren't wearing panties.
No.
And when I got to the point where they were wearing what we might think of as panties, like pantalettes or whatever, they were crotchless.
Oh.
So it's a different situation. But for decades, no underpants.
Yeah, for most, up until what, like the 20th century, it's become standard to wear underpants.
The closed, closed crotch.
Yeah.
I think late Victorian. No, you might be right. It might be 20th century. That's not something I've looked into very closely.
No,
okay, so Mary Lynn,
the more modern we get, we know less.
When you start getting close to the early 1900, I think I've seen some advertisements, but I'm not positive if they were earlier.
Huh. Well, so Mary Lynn and I have the same question: is what did they do at that time of the month then, if they didn't have anything there?
I think it's like tied on. They're rags. Rags. So I imagine they're somehow tied. I don't know this much about that either. But
we have to check the Museum of Menstruation.
What?
Let's get the answer. There's a Museum of Menstruation.
There's a museum for everything.
So this I'm gonna have to check out. Okay.
Yeah, I have to find. Because I can't remember. I know we looked it up at some time, but I can't remember.
Mm-hmm.
But it was rags. How they held the rags on, I'm assuming some kind of a belt thing.
Something, yeah.
That it was pinned to, and they would have been straight pins because they didn't have safety
pins yet.
Oh man.
Or just tied. It could have been tied with knots.
Right.
I don't know.
The things that we take for granted, right?
Yeah.
Catherine asks about the manufacturing of these materials. How were they able to manufacture such refined, delicate fabric in those times and have them actually so smooth and consistent, like the satins and the gauzes and the velvets? They're amazing.
Susan?
Wait, I'm sorry. I was looking at the other things. I'm sorry. What did you do?
I know it's very distracting. But how do they manufacture these fine fabrics back in the day?
The same way. I mean, on looms. I mean, the as far as weaving by hand, that has been pretty much the same for hundreds of years. A lot of the finest fabrics are going to be coming from India. A lot of silks and the cottons. But yeah, the Industrial Revolution changes everything, and all of a sudden fabric becomes much more democratic. It's much more affordable, so more people can have more fancier fabrics. But before that, it's all pretty much woven. It's woven on looms by hand.
Wow. Can you imagine the work that goes into that, though?
I try to think about that because it's like there are fabrics now that you can't even get anymore. The method of making them, there are some beautiful muslins that were so fine from, at least I know, the Regency era, that they no longer exist.
Mm-hmm.
No one's making them.
I did a program talking about museums last week with the Bata Shoe Museum, and they said the same thing, that there's certain kind of shoes that are just not made anymore because the way of making them has been lost to time.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of things that people can just talk about now. Think how clothes that you remember wearing or something as a child that now are no longer accessible, and even things that are like pre-pandemic when people dressed up much more for work, where women are wearing suits and stuff. I don't know, nobody's wearing business suits. You walk around Manhattan and you don't see very many people in suits anymore. And it used to always be suits and even hats and coats and all this, and you just don't see that. So fashion is always changing, and the fabrics, the textiles are changing with it.
Well, Shelley brings up a good point that they also can't make some of the fabrics because a specific type of sheep or wool doesn't exist anymore, which is really interesting that they're just extinct. Those kinds of animals. Laura asks, I'd love to hear more about any recent discoveries you've made, like although we're not doing images tonight, maybe some other time, but we were going to be talking about breeches today too. Did they say breeches or breeches? How do we say this?
Breeches. At least my time is breeches. Yeah. I think it's just how it's different. People are saying it different ways. I think it starts out as breeches and then maybe becomes breeches.
So, but the pants that guys wore through their lifetime changed as they age, right? They had different pants when they were younger versus when they were older, when they were doing something fancy versus doing something like riding, things like that. Just like us, like we have different clothes for different occasions.
Yeah, there's specific kinds of clothing for different. Is that what you mean? That there's different.
Yeah, but specifically pants for men, breeches, or when do they have long pants? When do they get into the long pants? Those are older men, right? Or
no, it's the long pants start happening in the right around the Regency time. Before that, they're wearing the breeches that go to the knee, but they also can get confusing because breeches also refers to these longer ones. The buckskin breeches could be longer. What I can tell you about the breeches, the buckskin, for instance, the leather breeches, they were very, very, very tight.
Okay.
They would make the most of the stretch that's inherent to the skins, and as they would bag out after a while. But it's there's Loretta smiling at tight breeches.
I'm also thinking.
Didn't Mark say something about they had to make them like 4 inches smaller?
Because they would stretch.
Yeah.
How long did it take for them to, I mean, like jeans, like, you wear it once and it's a little bit looser and you wear it like 10 times and it's like falling off of you?
Probably after.
Yeah.
Because they also remind me of jeans because they get very soft, the soft leather. So it is sort of, anyway, they were comfy pants for men.
I do remember when I was starting to write and didn't have access to a lot of materials, how incredibly mysterious it was to me, the breeches, and how did they work? Where were the buttons? And because I learned, they didn't have a fly front, so how did they fasten? So when we first went to Colonial Williamsburg together, that was the big thrill, and that was why we wrote that first blog. Oh wow, I can actually see it. There are the 2 buttons, and there's that little thing tying in the back that makes that like bulgy bottom. And, yeah.
We should explain that these were breeches that were sitting on a counter. They weren't on a person that you investigated. I mean, the people, the tradespeople and the costume interpreters are dressed in 18th century clothing, but they also have samples of the clothing around so you can look at them. You don't.
Right. We don't undress the interpreters.
I mean, I've heard you guys will do anything for research, so
yeah.
That's so funny.
Well, they wouldn't let us.
No, but do they wear truly authentic clothes even if they're uncomfortable?
But they're not uncomfortable because they wear them every day.
That's true.
So that they're just like they don't refer to them as costumes. It's their clothes, and so they don't feel uncomfortable. It's the same thing if you watch. I would see some of the women who would arrive in 20th century clothes, say, and then quickly change into, and they would be really fast at getting all those layers on, stays on, because they did it every day.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So it just sort of becomes second nature.
Mm-hmm. Susan asks, were boots or socks more common with breeches?
Were which more common?
Boots or socks? You know, like how you can wear socks
stockings, like shoe and stockings, I guess. Well, boots are, despite what Bridgerton shows, where the people are in the men are in ballroom wearing boots. Boots are more for specific outdoor kinds of things. You didn't usually wear them that much indoors, right, Loretta? I'm thinking 18th century people, if you were hunting, you came inside, you would still be wearing your boots. But for the most part, if you were calling on someone in their drawing room or going to their house for a meal or out to dance, you would never be wearing boots.
I wouldn't associate them with formal dress. I wouldn't associate them with evening dress. I mean, Beau Brummel, you have those images of him in the tight long breeches, and he's wearing the Hessian boots.
That's a different but even then, that's for day, right?
Yeah, I would assume that's for day wear, because most of the images I'm thinking of, the men are wearing evening slippers. But it's interesting because I have come upon a few things in the newspapers from the 1830s where the king or the queen is telling people, look, you don't wear boots to one of the court events unless you're a military officer. Apparently guys were wearing their boots to the levees and the drawing rooms, and this was a no-no. So, but they would have to put these messages in the paper so that, guys would dress properly. No, and I'm like, don't have bouncers?
You don't fit the dress code. Go away.
So yeah, and everyone's going to be wearing stockings, except for really poor people who don't have shoes or stockings, but they're all wearing stockings.
Yeah, they're all socks. We would call them socks. But yeah.
Can I go back
again, there's going to be different levels of whether they're coarse woolen socks or very fine cotton.
To just go back to the buckskins, though, I always thought that was an American sort of like, men wearing buckskin here, but is that was happening in Europe as well? In other
places?
And they're coming from, the hides come from America too.
Yeah.
Would just go, there are so many deer, and everyone always thinks that they come to America and they think there's limitless resources, so they would just slaughter deer left and right and send the hides to England. Right, Loretta?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So what did they do before that? Like before America was discovered and deer were discovered in America, what did they wear before that? Just regular pants?
That's outside my
earlier.
Yeah. They probably were leather. I mean, they obviously they had leather.
There's leather. Yeah.
There's leather. But the buckskin, I think, comes more from America. But
they had sheepskin, and it's like, of course they had animal hides of various kinds, but I think the buckskin thing was really when they're importing it from the United States or from America, actually, because it's colonial.
Yeah, and whoever is saying that there are more deer now in the northeastern U.S. has seen my backyard. So yes, we have a lot of deer. We have no flowers, but we have deer.
So just as a last question about men's clothing, where have you found the best place to find information about men's clothing for the eras you write about?
Well, it's a tricky.
Yeah. If you, I mean, you can go first.
No, you go first.
One of the things is, as you've probably figured out by now, Loretta and I like going to places like Colonial Williamsburg where you can see and touch things, but there's also costume museums and, obviously lots of primary source material talking about books, newspapers, descriptions of clothing. There's never quite as much stuff about the men as there is about the women. And the men's clothes tends to be worn, remodeled. Men are more practical in that sense. Their clothes are not, they would wear them until they wore out or remodeled or pass them down. Whereas a lot of women's clothes, if there's some really particularly spectacular dress is preserved, and museums tend to collect the spectacular clothes rather than the everyday clothes. So it's more of a challenge to find surviving men's garments.
It really is. I mean, they have some at the V&A. We saw some at Colonial Williamsburg museums. They've got a really interesting exhibition right now of a collection of clothing from is it Mary Deering, Susan, collection, which I understand it's going to be changing every season because you don't want to leave the garments out in the light.
I can't stand that. Yeah, you have to keep cycling things through.
But you get a good chance to look at them then. And the V&A and other sites like that do have not as many men's garments, but there are some.
What is V&A? Just
Victoria and Albert Museum.
got it. But Loretta, I think last time we talked about you actually use quite a few magazines, like old magazines.
Yeah, I do.
They didn't have the men's clothing. You'd think they would.
They have almost nothing. The ones that I have. And I've seen a little bit more in the French magazines. And I know that there were men's fashion magazines because I see references to them. But I have not had much luck finding them online so far.
Okay. Well, we are all feeling challenged to help you. We got our people here that can go online and see if we can find some men's fashion magazines. Okay, just a couple of more questions. Mary Lynn says, we read in our romances about people changing multiple times a day. How much did it really happen? And was it strictly the upper class that did this? If they did it.
Changing a couple of times a day would definitely be an upper class thing. But people, even more middling sort people, would have multiple shirts. It's like you have more pairs of how much underwear do you have? So yeah, and I'm thinking the shirts, I'm thinking back to like during the Revolutionary War, there's great concern about how many shirts each soldier has and things like that. They worry about that. So shirts are important. Shirts are one of the few garments. Almost everything is made commercially by tailors or seamstresses and stuff. There's not much made at home, though everybody always thinks that they're making it all at home. But most things are bought, made professionally, and people buy them. But shirts are one of the things that you could make at home because they're actually not structurally, they're fairly simple. It's hard sewing in that you have to make it very tiny stitches to withstand the washing, but construction wise, there's no tailoring really to a shirt. So women would make shirts. You'll read things about letters like they're sending somebody off to school or off to be a soldier or something, and the women in the household are also making their shirts to send them off so that they're outfitted.
And I do know that women would change their clothes several times a day in at least the time period I work in, which is the early 1800s. But I think that thing where they're changing their clothes like 6 or 7 times a day, I think that's much later, late Victorian, maybe.
Yeah, what's the fact? But again, it's affluent people.
Yes, totally. I mean, poor people just didn't have that many clothes to change into.
No. One of the things I think, just sort of throwing this out here, that I think is really interesting is about the lifespan of clothes, because now there's so much talk about disposable clothing and fast fashion and where is it all going, that because clothes represented so much more of an investment in time, energy, and just the fabric, clothes had a very long lifespan. They would say start out belonging to a wealthy person who then in turn would give it to their servants when they were tired of it. And they would get going down sort of chains of the secondhand clothing stores or clothing shops and stuff. The things just it was always used. Things were literally worn to bits till they became rags. So,
and then the rags were used for paper.
Yeah. So it's just sort of interesting about how they valued clothing much more than we do now. So that was it. That was
But what about something like a ball gown, like a very, very expensive ball gown? Would that, I can't imagine like, that being handed down to a thrift store.
No, but they were often kept and remodeled because you will see um, some of the, like a beautiful mid 18th century silk will be remade into new styles over and over. And then like there's this gap where there's the style is for the like the Regency era clothes, which are very lightweight cotton, and all those ball gowns were packed away because the silk was so valuable. And they reappear, that silk will reappear in like 1840s dresses. You'll see it again. They dig out grandma's old dress and remake it because the silk is valuable.
Mhm. So would you say that the style wasn't as important as the fabrics?
The fabric is the most important thing. It's worth more than the labor that went into making the clothes too.
Okay. Wow. Did you ever read A Knight in Shining Armor by Jude Deveraux?
Yes.
Long time ago. Yeah.
It's got a very controversial ending, romance book, but in it, the main character, the guy, it's a time travel book, and he comes from like the 1700s, 1800s, and comes forward in time. And he's so disappointed that the fabrics and the clothing for men is so boring. He's like, I don't want to wear jeans and t-shirts. Where's all the fluffy stuff? Where's all the and I just get such a kick out of that. That men really, really thought about their fashion back in the
They,
back.
they did. I mean, the fact that you open a newspaper and they'll tell you the men's fashions for the month and what the men are wearing in Paris and and that's what's so frustrating to me because I'm seeing them and I think, well, where did you get the description? Where's this? Because I know they stole everything from one another, so they must have got it from a magazine somewhere.
Mhm. We just can't find those magazines, right?
Yeah, but they were very, depending on the time you're talking about. I think throughout, the men who could afford it, the tailoring was very, very important to them. And it was really important to have a beautifully cut coat and whatever you're wearing to bottoms. And that doesn't really change for a long, long time. So the exquisite tailoring is always something that's very important. The styles of things might change. The men's collar might have, like, at one point you might have the M notch, but later on you might have the shawl collar. So the styles are changing more subtly than women's, but they're still changing. The big thing was beautiful fabric and exquisite tailoring.
Mhm.
And that's like, a guy who cared about the way he looked, that would be the thing for him.
Mhm. Right, because not everybody can afford those amazing fabrics and
Right.
The tailoring to go along with it. Okay, so I think we've dug into men's clothing enough, although I do want to ask you, I think it was Laura's last question, was what is your most recent and interesting discovery about men's clothing?
I think it was the laundry in Kensington.
Well, also we started out talking about those waistcoat things because we were doing it this afternoon. So I guess that was.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I love that even though no matter how much research you do, something new can just kind of like come up.
Yes.
Yeah. And now, Susan, I'm going to go back to your pendant and ask what
Yeah, and I don't know how I'm going to take it off.
The most amazing collection of
Well, I like miniature portraits, and that's my long time ago. I was an art history major. I can't buy big portraits, big paintings, but I can buy the little ones. So this one was actually, if you can see her, let's see there. Okay, that's Angelica Schuyler Church. So she's Alexander Hamilton's sister-in-law. If you know the Hamilton musical, she's in there a lot. And I first saw this for sale there it goes, here we go, on Instagram years ago, and I recognized her. She was just listed as a portrait of a lady. and had no name to her. But I recognized her from other paintings, who it was. And I stupidly contacted the dealer and said, I know, like, teacher, I know who it is. And she said, that's fascinating. And instantly the price went up once you know who it was. And it was beyond, at that point, I could not afford it. But the person who did buy it, they kept track of it. And then he's like selling off his collection. And he contacted me and said, do you still want it? And that's how I ended up with it. But I think it's really, there are so few paintings of American women from this time period. There aren't many miniatures from around the Revolution and earlier. Later on, they become more popular. And the fact that this is an American woman. She had that done. The artist is Samuel Shelley. So she had it painted when she was in London. So it's just part of the reason. But there aren't that many of them from American. So she's special.
And I remember last time we met, I think you said that a lot of times in those miniatures, they even have like hair or something.
Oh yeah, this one doesn't have any hair in the back. They often have elaborate woven with like a souvenir of the person's hair. And if you're exchanging a miniature, because this is before photographs, and most people too do not sit for great big paintings, big life-size portraits. But this is much more of an affordable kind of option. And they're often exchanged as before you're getting married, as a sweethearts thing. Mothers and sons, fathers and daughters, family members would have them done. And that's also what makes it hard to tell who the subject are, because just like you don't identify who people are in your family picture, most of them are unidentified. Mm-hmm. The owner knew who it was, and that was it. But they tend to also be more accurate representations of the people, because they're not made for show. They were made as a token for somebody who knew what that person looked like. So they're sort of more intimate too.
So if we were to find that hair, we could Jurassic Park somebody.
You what?
Jurassic Park them. We can clone them.
Well, from the hair, I guess, if you really want to.
Kind of do.
But the hair turns up like a memorial jewelry and stuff too, because it's like the last tangible thing. When somebody died, they would often cut mementos of their hair, because it doesn't deteriorate. It's your last connection with someone, and they're gone. So I always think it's sad with jewelry and things, where the first thing people do is throw the hair away, and it's like, oh, I know it's creepy, but it was also somebody's really important thing.
Yeah, my mom used to, when she got her haircut, she would make one of those buns out of it. I mean, she's a child of the 60s, right? She would make the bun, put her hair all around it, and, so she reused her hair quite a bit. Oh, yeah, you need DNA testing. You need the roots as well as the hair. All right.
So we'll bring back there's a lot of Alexander Hamilton hair around in various collections and stuff, that when he died, his wife Eliza cut off a lot of he had very long hair. So there's lots of his red hair around in various places.
Okay, I'll have to look.
We went off on the hair tangent here.
It's the whole cloning thing. I'm sorry. I'm very fascinated. Virginia asks, do you have a favorite piece of clothing or decorative art object that you incorporated into a book? Anything you yourself would want to wear or have had reproduced? Loretta?
I can't really think of anything right now.
Specific. Sometimes you see something and you'll kind of, my cat's here. It's Trixie. Trixie often comes to Zooms. Sometimes you'll see an actual garment or a painting of something, and you'll change it a little bit, but when you describe your character wearing it. Yes, Loretta?
Well, for me, so much of it is I'm thumbing through fashion magazines, and I'm thumbing through, and I'm looking at images from various collections, and sometimes the clothing gives me an idea for a scene. But the most obvious thing I can think of right now is from Lord of Scoundrels, when I had been reading about these icons. And I thought that would be the perfect object that everyone wants for these Russian icons. So I guess that's probably the best example. It's not the most recent by any stretch of the imagination, but that's the first one I'm coming up with.
Best book ever, I'm just gonna say.
Yeah.
Okay,
I guess too with clothes, I like writing about clothes as being significant to part of the story. And one of the things, if you really like historical clothing, is to not do the red carpet and what are you wearing and list everything, because nobody cares about that. You have to sort of think about how it affects the character. And I guess one of my favorite things is not clothing I would necessarily want to wear. In The Secret Wife of Aaron Burr, I have the heroine Mary is brought as an enslaved servant from India, where she has only worn very loose flowing clothing, comfortable, basically what we would think of as very comfortable, airy clothing. And she gets to America and she's going to become a house servant. So they put her in heavy English 18th century clothing. They buy it all used. So she's wearing, all of a sudden she has to wear heavy shoes and she has to wear heavy stockings. And it just feels, after what she had been wearing, it's like another layer of oppression, that the clothes really are symbolic at that point of just the change in her life at that point. So it's fun to do, not fun, but I mean, it really helps you build a character when you do things, when you try and really see things through their eyes, and you hope that the reader will go there with you.
Have you found that too, Loretta, that
I've done that. I mean, very often I'll the clothing helps me set the tone for the scene. And it also gives me a way for the hero to look at the heroine. And because the clothes from the 1830s, which is the time I'm writing in, are so bizarre. Women's clothes are so bizarre. I love it as a comic element. So I think that they do inspire things, but not necessarily a specific scene. They inspire more like dialogue or something like that.
And you also have to sort of figure out what the character feels like wearing them. If you're wearing a beautiful dress, it makes you feel like you're something special. And as you say, when the hero sees the heroine, you hope it's a good response.
Yeah, I know we're not going to talk about Bridgerton, but there was a scene where the character in season 3 had like a glow up, and everybody was like, people watching it were like, oh, she didn't need to be like that to get a guy. And she really didn't, because she was still as awkward as ever. The clothes made very little difference to the way that she actually, her characterization as a person. So I thought that was really fascinating. People are loving your books, Loretta. Russian icons, fashion, women's fashion. I did want to take a few minutes to talk about places that you have visited to do your research, because we've talked about Colonial Williamsburg a lot, and I finally got to go in March, and I was like so thrilled because I got to kind of walk in your footsteps, and it was fascinating. So I'm going to actually ask in the chat too, if people want to say like places that they've been where they learn about what people were doing in different historical eras while we're talking about it. So of course, Colonial Williamsburg is maybe the one that you go to most, would you say?
Yes. I went to Old Sturbridge Village in Massachusetts because that's 1830s, and I also at that point I was trying to get a sense of farming and farm life, and that's more of an agricultural community. So that was really interesting. I know there are several places in the U.S. I just haven't been to all of them, and we mentioned Plymouth Plantation, which is fantastic. Because talk about time travel, but it's got a different name, Susan, right? It's Plymouth
it's
something.
Now something else, yeah.
Plymouth Museums or something like that, because I was just there.
Yeah,
I saw the signs.
They have changed the name.
They've changed the name.
Somebody else knows it, but yes, I'm seeing here, Strawberry Bank, the Merchant House in New York City. Yeah, they're all different levels. We talk about Williamsburg because it's the largest one in the world, I think, the largest living history museum in the world. But almost every area has a historic house that often has programs where they bring in people who are doing historical crafts or trades things and stuff, and you can learn. learn wherever you go.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're looking for interpreters, I think in the sense of the way they are in Colonial Williamsburg or Plymouth, whatever that is now, the Plymouth Museums, I don't think there are quite as many. And the same holds true for England. So you can visit, you can visit lots of historic homes in England, but they're not always set up so that there are people who are reenacting what that life was like or interpreting what that life was like. Plymouth Patuxent Museum. Okay.
They wanted to honor the Patuxet who had been in that area prior to the Mayflower coming in. Okay, cool. Yes, exactly. So there are lots of, like, let's say in Europe, there's lots of castles, but which ones of them are working castles, where you can learn about the history of the place? And there's not that many, but there's also in the US, there's lots of places out west, like you think like around the Alamo, where there's like major conflict. Those kind of things are have interpreters. People have like travel, you guys.
Yeah, someone mentioned Hampton Court Palace, which was what I was trying to remember.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see Henry VIII, walking down in the garden. It's very cool.
And
there are all different levels of accuracy.
Yes.
And stuff.
Yes.
Too.
Yeah.
So how would you figure that out? Like if it was if they were being historically accurate or not?
If you see a zipper, you're in trouble.
That's what you were talking about earlier, Susan, was that you cannot get those reenactors to drop their
At Plymouth, I remember one summer when I was in college, I applied to become a seasonal interpreter, and I didn't make it. I didn't do it, but it was one of those things that they were going to give you all the you had to learn the dialect of the specific settlers who were where they'd come from in England, and it was a lot. I mean, they really go into everything.
Really serious, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And have you noticed now that you've been back out there checking places that there is a more diverse understanding of what was happening in those places at those times? Like when I went to Colonial Williamsburg, they were really talking about the slaves that were brought in, or the free Black men that were supporting, the industries, or even, had their own stores and things like that. I know in Louisiana, they talk a lot about what's gone on in the plantations and the impact slaves had there, but also that when they became free, how they survived and stuff. Have you noticed that in these places that they're a little bit more?
They are, but they get a lot of pushback. And I don't want to get political here, but there are a lot of people who get very unhappy if they go someplace and learn that there was somebody else who built that house and took care of the beautiful clothing and worked in the fields. And they don't want that. They just want the pretty fantasy. They just want to hear about the rich white people. Mm-hmm. And that's all I'm going to say. But I think a lot of places are attempting to do that. As I said, they get some pushback, and they may be getting more now. I don't know.
I mean, just from my perspective, I love it. Like, I think, when I go to those places, I feel like I have a better vision of what was going on at those times, a more complete vision.
That's it. You have to tell the whole story. It's not like you're cutting out George Washington, but let's learn about the other 300 people who were on his land. Mm-hmm. So yeah, you just like a bigger picture.
Yeah, more comprehensive. Yeah, we're still going through like Nova Scotia and Newport. I mean, places that have interpreters or people that are teaching us what it was like to live there in different times. I'm sorry, Loretta, I interrupted you.
Newport is fun because it's got two different histories. You have the 18th century pre-Revolutionary War in Newport, and then you get to the Gilded Age Newport. So it's like two different levels of history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have not been to Newport, believe it or not, even though I live like like an hour away.
Yeah, you should go.
I haven't been in ages either, Mina. So that's
I feel like
so close.
I feel a nerdy girl field trip coming on. We'll have to talk. So we just have a few more minutes, and I just wanted to make sure we talked about your upcoming books. I'm going to start with Susan. I know yours isn't coming out until next September.
Till next year, yeah. It's historical novel based on the life of Martha Washington. It's called Martha. And it isn't up for pre-order yet because it isn't until next fall. But I know that Mina is going to ask if you want to sign up for mailing lists. I promise I won't inundate you with junk, but I will let you know when it's going to be up for pre-order and when the actual release date when that comes.
Mm-hmm.
So Martha's been a long time coming.
Yes,
Yeah.
we've been
But
waiting.
she's just in time for the America 250.
Perfect. Now, what places did you go to research this book about Martha?
For that, well, obviously Mount Vernon, which was her home, but she traveled during the Revolution. She went to be during the winter encampments. She traveled to be with George, so she stayed with the army through most of the winters. So most of those places are still around, so I could go visit them as well.
It sounds chilly.
Yeah, well, it's a lot different traveling, just getting on 95 to go someplace rather than poor Martha and in a rickety carriage on bad roads, being terrified that the British were going to capture her as a bartering chip for George.
Oh, imagine. I can't even imagine.
Anyway, but we'll talk more about that later, as it gets closer to release date.
Definitely. We've been doing these things twice a year, so we'll get closer and closer as we go. Yep. Loretta, I know you have some book news.
I do. And I think today, tomorrow, maybe sometime this week, my website will be completely updated because we have got the cover for my new book, My Inconvenient Duke, which is coming out in January 2025. So I'm very excited about that because it took so damn long to finish it. But anyway, but I'm happy with it. And this was the third difficult Dukes book. I had a troubled couple. And so I looked at their relationship, the courtship, and then I looked at the marriage. And that's the story. So this will take care of the last of the Dukes. But I think I'm going to be doing a spin-off after that one.
Oh my gosh, the book gets better and better. But did you have to do any particular research for this third book?
We had been in London for a month several years ago, and I had tons of photographs and tons of information and books. I worked a lot with that, and I worked basically with the kinds of things I find online to make the story. But it's like the trip to Colonial Williamsburg, which usually happens once a year, is a great opportunity for me to get the information about clothing. And this last time I was asking about pockets because I was trying to figure out if a pickpocket was trying to steal someone's handkerchief, where would the handkerchief be, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. So I did speak at length to Mark Hutter and Neil Hurst about that's why the men's clothing thing came up. Mm-hmm. So it was mostly Colonial Williamsburg and then the material that I had gathered from the last trip. Mm-hmm. I get my money's worth out of these visits.
And so do we. For both of you. That's amazing. So yeah, we're
both going. Yeah, we're looking forward to the historic costume conference down in Williamsburg this fall. So if anybody else is going to be there, come over and introduce yourselves because we're going to be there.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. I'm totally looking that up as soon as we get home. Well, as always, I just loved our conversation. Thank you so much. I don't think, we ever think so much about men's clothing, but obviously you do the thinking for us in the research. Yes, costume conference at Williamsburg, be there or be square. Oh my gosh, I totally showed my age there, but
Well, thank you again for having us and
Yes,
for
thank you
everybody
so much.
who comes.
Always, always. We have so much fun. So everybody who's been here, thank you for sticking with us. And I hope you have many happy books in your very near future. I will talk to you all soon. Take care.
Bye.